Hello YouTube, this is Necrofe331 with another video. This one is in regards to getting ready for the next format, March 2012. Well, if not much has changed. Same decks that are on top are the same, still on top. We got two lower tier decks that became even lower tier. But other than that, same decks top are the top as were last format for the most part. So getting ready for this next format, it's going to be very difficult. The game has gotten really expensive. Just to give you a few prices of how expensive this format is. This one makes last format look really cheap in comparison. Like, I know a lot of people were complaining about Psalm Warning last format, but at least that was an ultra rare that you had a decent chance of pulling. Now we have several cards that are pretty much vital to the game, which I think is bad, that are really hard to get and really expensive. Now, the pros will say, oh, well, you should have gotten these cards when they were cheap. Well, I tell people, those people, fuck you, you don't know shit. Shut the hell up. Okay, because you don't know when a player started. They could have just started. They could have seen the Chaos Dragon deck or whatever and said, oh, hey, this looks cool. Decided to build a deck and call it good. And then they go and they try to make it competitive, and then they say, oh, hey, what the hell? Why are these cards so freaking expensive? So just to put, into, I guess, I don't know, make a comparison. Last format, the two money cards. There's only really two money cards in the format. The first one was Pot of Duality, obviously, which was floating $150, which was pretty expensive and was out of the budget of most players, which angered a lot of people about the card. And I get it. A staple should never be that expensive, ever. Especially something like Pot of Duality. The second card that got a lot of people angry was Psalm Warning. And that card was a little bit more inexpensive because it was an ultra rare. But even that card was roaming around at, $80 to $90 for most of last format. I myself only was able to get a hold of one, and I just barely got a second one right before the announcement that it was being re-released in a tin. So it was kind of useless. But anyway, so we had two money cards, and yeah, the game was fairly expensive. Decks would go about, a good tier 1 deck was probably around $600 to $1,000, which is a lot. The extra deck doesn't help, because we had Scrap Dragon, which was at 40. We had Trishula at that time, which was at 35. Brio, stuff like that. Even Librarian was fairly expensive back then. Formula was $15. Etc., etc. So the game wasn't cheap last format, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to justify it. It was not cheap. This format now it's ridiculous. I mean, you got here. I want to mention just the most expensive cards of the format. I think the most detrimental card, the card that I think is most hurt, is most, I guess, annoying being at the rarity it is, and how hard it is to get, and the price tag, is Max C. We all know this is probably the only decent counter to the wind-up loop. It allows you to refuel your hand after you've lost it. So, it gives you a shot, a fighting chance at winning. It probably won't. It doesn't ensure anything, and that's, I think, the biggest problem is Max C itself isn't that great of a card. It's just we have to rely on it because we have no real other options, especially against the wind-up loop. So this card is over $100, so it's worth more than Psalm Warning. And most decks made nowadays are maining 2 or 3. Not only that, but there's no decent substitutes. I know last format, a lot of players that could afford warnings would use black horns to deal with the priority cards, and then they use bottomless to deal with stuff that didn't have priority effects. And it worked alright, I guess. It wasn't amazing, but it did all well. It did fine. Max C, on the other hand, there really isn't a whole lot of other options. People say effective, but most people that are maining Max C's are probably maining effect whalers as well. So that doesn't leave you with many options. In fact, it barely leaves you with any. People have been floating around certain cards, but none of them come even nearly as close as Max C in dealing specifically with the wind-up loop. So, yeah, this is bad for the game. $100 card. This card needs to get reprinted. It's from an old pack, as a secret rare. And, and the pros will say, well, at one point in time it was like $10. But, for one, it was $10 because it sucked. It wasn't that good last time. It was teched, I think, in side decks, and that was about it. And it didn't see any play because last format was less derpy. We didn't have Storm. We didn't have as much of the bullshit that we have now that require you to have hand traps. I hate hand traps. They just defeat. What was the point of having traps if the only good ones are now hand traps? I mean, they're not even traps, they're monsters. That's stupid. I mean, it defeats specific mechanics of the game. But regardless, yeah, Maxi is definitely hurting a lot of players because it's one of the only counters to the big three, and yet if you can afford Maxis, you probably can afford one of the big three decks anyways, so you're probably going to be running one of the big three decks, so kind of defeats its purpose. Another card that I want to mention is Wind Up Zenmines. This card, I bought one on eBay for about 35 bucks. I bid about 15 times before I actually got it at that price, but I did get it. And it did stay fairly decent. It wasn't ever cheap, but it stayed at a decent level, at least, up until Orcs. Then it skyrocketed, and now it's about the same price as Max C. It's pretty much a staple, especially if you can actually Xyz rank 3s. You're going to want at least one of them. And yet, the barrier of entry for this game right now is really high. So, yeah. Wind Up Zenmines, $100. So we got two $100 cards right now. One of them that has to be played 3s. One of them that's played typically in 1s, unless you're playing wind-ups, then you're usually running 2. But then we have for the wind-up deck, for those of you interested in building the obnoxious deck that's screwing this format over. Thank you, wind-up players. Wind-up Rabbit. This card was $15. I just traded for one recently at $15, and now what is it at? Over 100, or about 100. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I guess I can't complain too much because it is part of only one archetype, and it's not required in any other deck. So if you can't afford it, you can just build another deck. So I guess my main complaints about that card are not that much of a big deal, and I don't see a huge problem with it being being what it is, and it will definitely go down when wind-ups get hit. So, Wind-Up Rabbit, $100. So we got three $100 cards in the meta right now. How many $100 cards do we have last format? 2. We had a couple other fairly expensive cards like Fossil Dyna, but for the most part, we only had a handful of actual really expensive cards. Alright, next card that's jumped up recently. Fortunately, it is getting reprinted, so that's kind of good. And that's Phoenix Chain. Unfortunately, this is one of the only good counters to the meta right now. And it jumped. I traded for a place at when it was at 10. Now each of them is worth 40 bucks around there. So yeah. And of course, last but not least, I'll have to input tour guide. Ridiculous price, absolutely ridiculous. And fortunately, it's getting reprinted though. But sadly, that's not really the card we need reprinted. We need that card hit by the ban list, and we need Max C reprinted. See what Konami's probably going to do is they'll probably give us Max C and a gold, because they're not making a gold series or a freaking tin, or something like that. And then they will change the format to the point where Max C becomes useless as a card, kind of like Fossil Dyna now. No, I'm joking. Fossil Dyna is still pretty good. Alright, so, yeah, that's pretty much it for, I guess it's kind of ranting about the format, the expensive nature of this format. This is a very, very expensive format. In fact, I think some people actually price it higher than Teledad, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. Because you have to take into account Extra Deck, which has a $100 card in there. A couple $40, $50 cards, $10 cards. It adds up. Like even this deck, my Six Samurai deck, I was just counting up some of the cards that I was using, and it got close to $1,000, and I was just stunned, how that could happen in a children's card game. So, yeah, so be prepared to pay or be a locals player for a while, because this game is not cheap right now. Really bad format for new players. Really bad format for budget players. Let the, rich kids and pros have their day, and hopefully September slaughters their deck. Because, yeah, things have gone out of hand. I forgot to actually mention another pretty big dollar card, and that's Rescue Rabbit. But again, for the same reasons as Wind Up Rabbit, I guess it's not as detrimental, in my opinion, than, say, Max C or Zen Mines or Phoenix Chain or whatever. So, anyways, that will be it for this video. Check out my next video. I was actually going to put in this video, but time's running kind of high, so I'm actually going to talk about a few decks that I guess are more budget oriented, that I think players should check out. At least for the locals, I don't necessarily think these deck types would be topping too many regionals or whatever, but or higher than, but at locals there's certain decks that I think may have a pretty good shot at a locals level, and so yeah, check that out. Anyways, this is Necro5331 signing out.